Welcome back, brothers and sisters in the Lord. At the point of dropping this video, there is one thing everybody online is waiting for right now, and that is the full memorial footage. Because as we're speaking, only one real clip from yesterday's service has made its way onto the internet publicly. Just one. And honestly, that alone tells you how tightly controlled this entire situation was from beginning to end. No live stream, no open media access, no public cameras roaming around the sanctuary. No independent Christian bloggers sitting in the audience posting updates every 5 minutes. Nothing. The entire memorial was handled behind closed doors, and for a family whose lives have played out in front of cameras for decades, that silence felt intentional. But according to what multiple people are now reporting, Daystar has apparently promised that the full memorial service will be released publicly, which means by the time some of y'all are watching this video, the footage could already be online, or it could drop literally any minute. And trust me, the moment it does, I already know the internet is going to go into overdrive. Because this memorial was never just about mourning JONI Lamb. Let's be honest about that from the beginning. Yesterday was bigger than grief. Yesterday felt like years of unresolved tension, ministry politics, fractured relationships, loyalty, betrayal, silence, forgiveness, power struggles, public scandal, and family heartbreak all colliding in one room at the exact same time. That's why people were watching this so closely. People weren't only waiting to see tributes and worship songs. They were waiting to see who sat where, who acknowledged who looked uncomfortable, who spoke publicly, who stayed silent, whether Jonathan and his sisters interacted, whether Weiss would take center stage, whether the atmosphere felt healing, or whether it felt like people barely surviving the same room together for 2 hours. And honestly, I don't think anybody truly understood how emotionally loaded yesterday was going to be until people actually started arriving at Gateway Church. Now, before I go any further, let me say this clearly because I think it matters. Regardless of where people stand on this entire Daystar situation, yesterday was still a funeral. A real family lost someone. Children lost their mother. Grandchildren lost their grandmother. Friends lost somebody they had known for decades. There was real grief in that room, real pain, real emotions. But at the same time, there was also history sitting in every chair. And that's the part people feel even if nobody says it out loud. Now, one of the first major updates that started circulating online yesterday involved James. Somebody many of y'all probably already recognized from following this story closely. According to his own statement, he was apparently placed on a banned list and removed from the sanctuary shortly after arriving. What stood out to me wasn't even the removal itself. It was the tone of what he said afterward. Because instead of coming online screaming angrily or turning it into some dramatic confrontation, he kept repeating one thing over and over again: reconciliation. That word keeps coming up in this story no matter how messy things get. He said something that honestly stuck with me. He said Jonathan needs his sisters, and Rachel and Rebecca need their brother. And whether people agree with every detail surrounding this story or not, I think most people watching understand exactly why that statement hit so hard. Because underneath all the public controversy, underneath the recordings, the lawsuits, the firings, the accusations, the online commentary, the ministry politics, and the church drama, this is still a family. A broken family, yes. A divided family, absolutely, but still a family. And funerals have a way of forcing people into emotional spaces they've been avoiding for years. That's what yesterday felt like to me. It felt like people walking into a room carrying years of unresolved emotions that suddenly became impossible to ignore because death has a way of interrupting pride. Now, one of the biggest emotional questions leading into yesterday was whether Jonathan Lamb would actually attend the memorial service. And he did. And honestly, that alone spoke volumes. Because whether people support Jonathan publicly or criticize him publicly, nobody can pretend walking into that building yesterday would have been easy for him emotionally. Think about everything attached to that room. Years of public family fallout, leaked recordings, employment disputes, public allegations, broken trust, statements online, people choosing sides publicly. And then on top of all that, showing up to mourn your mother in front of the same people connected to some of the most painful years of your life. Most people would have avoided that situation completely. But he showed up anyway. And I'm not gonna lie, there's something deeply human about that. Because funerals force reality onto everybody involved. Suddenly all the arguments, all the tension, all the anger gets interrupted by one unavoidable truth. The person at the center of it all is gone, forever. And that changes the emotional atmosphere whether people are ready for it or not. Now, another person people were watching closely yesterday was Susie Lamb. And honestly, over time, Susie has quietly become one of the most emotionally important voices in this entire situation. Because while a lot of people online have approached this story from a political angle or a gossip angle, Susie's public statements have consistently felt deeply personal. Pain, exclusion, grief, forgiveness, disappointment, all of it. And yesterday, people paid attention to everything involving Jonathan and Susie because people understand symbolism during funerals matters. People notice seating arrangements. People notice hugs. People notice who gets acknowledged publicly. People notice who speaks. People notice body language. And in situations where years of conflict exist underneath the surface, every little interaction suddenly carries emotional meaning. Now let's talk about something else people keep discussing online right now. Gateway Church being chosen as the venue itself, because that decision immediately became controversial before the memorial even started. Some people felt it made perfect sense because of the ministry relationships involved behind the scenes. Other people questioned the optics, completely considering the public controversy already surrounding Gateway over the last year. But regardless of where people stand on that debate, one thing is undeniable. The moment Gateway became attached to this memorial, the service immediately became bigger than a private family farewell. It became symbolic. And that symbolism added another layer of emotional tension onto an already emotionally overwhelming day. Now, of course, another major figure everybody was watching yesterday was Weiss. And let me say this carefully because people are extremely divided emotionally whenever his name enters the conversation. Whether supporters want to admit it or critics want to exaggerate it, Doug's arrival into JONI LAMB'S life permanently changed the public dynamic surrounding the Daystar family. That's simply reality. The moment that relationship became public, the internet conversation surrounding Daystar shifted dramatically. Some people celebrated the relationship immediately. Others questioned the timing. Others questioned the fallout attached to it. Others felt deeply uncomfortable with how quickly everything unfolded publicly after Marcus Lamb's death. And yesterday, all of those emotions were still sitting quietly in the atmosphere, whether anyone addressed them directly or not. Because funerals don't magically erase public controversy. Sometimes they expose it even more. And I think that's part of why so many people remain emotionally invested in this story. It's not just internet drama. This situation touches faith, leadership, power, accountability, grief, family loyalty, church culture, forgiveness, influence, and public image all at once. People see pieces of their own church experiences reflected inside this story. That's why reactions have become so intense. Now, another major conversation happening online right now involves the fact that the service was reportedly recorded first instead of live-streamed live. And some people are already suspicious about that. Because naturally, people are wondering whether editing will happen before the public sees the footage. Now, to be fair, recording a memorial privately before releasing it publicly is not automatically unusual. A lot of ministries do that for security reasons, emotional reasons, or simply to avoid technical issues. But because this situation already carries so much public tension attached to it, people immediately started asking questions. Would certain moments be removed? Would emotional interactions get cut out? Would uncomfortable moments stay in? Would certain speakers receive more focus than others? And honestly, those questions only exist because trust surrounding this entire situation has already been damaged publicly over the last several years. Now, something else that really caught people's attention yesterday involved the resurfacing of older prophetic warnings directed toward JONI LAMB and Daystar.
It's a dream I want to just tell you about. In my dream, I see myself standing with a group of people, all blessed white. I see the Lord. I see JONI LAMB'S sitting on an organ to the left. She's in heaven now. I see this gate, beautiful gate, shining with diamonds. And now the Lord does this. And the gates open, and the first man was in. And she played beautiful music, came out of that organ, heavenly music. And then the gates closed, and the Lord did. And the next person, and the same music. Now, to my shock, the Lord did. Two big men came and took one of the people away. When he turned, I saw his face. I'll never forget the fear on that man's face. And out of that organ came the most frightening music. Well, one after another went in, and then some were rejected. And this all in the room, I can see it like it was last night. My turn came. I'm now on the front. I look at the Lord. Jeannie looks at the Lord. You can imagine what I felt. I'm feeling it now. Is it yes? Or is it no? And suddenly I woke up with this voice in my ear. I'm watching you, don't blow it. It scared me. When I tell that dream, people say, well, how can you fail? I said, don't ever forget 1 Corinthians 9:27, where Paul said, I put my body under subjection, lest after I have preached others, I be cast away. So we can be anointed, but if we're not living right, we'll be rejected.
And this is where things become deeply emotional, depending on your personal beliefs. Because some people see those warnings now and feel like they were watching spiritual accountability unfold in real time. Others believe people are going too far by trying to spiritually interpret someone's death publicly. And honestly, this is where I personally think people need to tread very carefully. Because regardless of opinions surrounding JONI LAMB'S leadership decisions, none of us truly know what conversations happened privately between her and God during her final days. None of us. And I think sometimes the internet forgets that public figures are still human beings. Now, one thing I will say though, this entire Daystar situation has forced a massive conversation inside Christian media culture that probably needed to happen a long time ago. People are asking difficult questions now. Questions about celebrity pastors. Questions about church power structures. Questions about accountability. Questions about ministries becoming corporations. Questions about whether audiences sometimes place leaders on pedestals that only God should occupy. And honestly, Those conversations are uncomfortable, but necessary. Because one thing yesterday reminded me of more than anything else is that no ministry empire, no television platform, no public reputation, and no institutional influence can protect human beings from emotional consequences forever. Eventually, everything surfaces. Eventually, pain surfaces. Eventually, fractures surface. Eventually, reality surfaces. And I think that's exactly what people felt yesterday while watching this memorial unfold from a distance. Now, moving forward, I already know people are going to analyze every second of that footage whenever it gets released publicly. People will study facial expressions. They'll study interactions. They'll study speeches. They'll study who appeared emotional and who didn't. And honestly, I don't think yesterday closed this story at all. I think it may have opened an entirely new chapter. Because now the question becomes, what happens next? What happens to Daystar moving forward? What happens to these relationships? What happens between Jonathan and his sisters? What happens to the people whose influence inside the ministry became connected to JONI over the last several years? What happens emotionally after the cameras disappear and everybody has to deal with reality privately? Those are the questions people are really asking now. But at the center of all of this is still one unavoidable truth. JONI Lamb is gone. And whether people supported her, criticized her, admired her, questioned her decisions, or disagreed with her leadership, her impact on Christian television is undeniable. For decades, she helped shape one of the most recognizable institutions in religious broadcasting. That legacy, complicated or not, is still part of the story. And after everything I watched unfold surrounding yesterday's memorial, I honestly think the biggest question now is whether genuine healing is actually possible from here, or whether the fractures inside this family and ministry world have simply gone too deep. That's the real conversation now. But I want to hear from y'all. Do you think yesterday's memorial changed anything emotionally between the Lamb family members? Do you think reconciliation is still possible after everything that has happened publicly? And once the full footage finally drops, what do you think people are going to be paying attention to the most? Drop your thoughts below, because trust me, this story is nowhere near over.